if we went from Walkman to Nokia phone, and we went from Nokia phone to ChatGPT, for my daughters who are 3 years or 5 years old, who are Generation Alpha, what will be their technology? Because if you ask me, when I was in Nokia, I read science fiction. I read about AIs or talking about blah, but it's seen as science fiction. So what's the science fiction of today that's going to happen in the next 20 years?
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, Sierra founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
I want to talk about course of history. And the course of economic history is, what was it like for hundreds of thousands of years? For 1,000,000 years of human history, what was life like? Because you and I are the product of our parents. Our parents had parents. Our grandparents had parents. Our great-grandparents, our grand-grand-grandparents. For 1,000,000 years, some random collision of people surviving, foraging, and making do with life over the course of history has survived to this day, and you and I exist as a result of that. And what I want to say about this is that this is a very interesting chart, because this shows on the y-axis how much money you make. What is the value, economic value of production you make, which roughly corresponds to the value that you produce and consume. So your GDP per capita, the gross domestic product per capita, on a per person basis, what is your average income? Humans have been around in some form or version for 1,000,000 years. And what's interesting to me is that for effectively almost 1,000,000 years, minus about 1,000 to 100, life was effectively the same. So this is analysis that basically says that basically every 100, whatever years, the amount of economic value that you generated more was 0.05%. And of course, lots of people died, there were wars, there were famines, there were plague. But on average, it was just a very minuscule amount in aggregate of society. The economy, whatever you want to call it, the agricultural economy you lived in, grew only 0.05% for 100,000 years, if not effectively 1,000,000 years. This is crazy amount of time. And over the past 100 years, we have seen this tremendous change over the past several hundred years of how much production we're creating, how much value we create. And so for most of human history, people made about, and we use this currency of $100 per year of value. Fruits, vegetables, raising a cow, surviving, being a soldier. And then suddenly, now we're at about, on a y-axis, again, there's a logarithmic curve from 100 to 1,000 to 10,000. Now we're at about, on a global basis, about $10,000 of income and production that we're doing every year. And so this is a crazy chart, because they show that most of the value of the world changing has happened only in the past several hundred years. And there's this inflection point. And so since then, we've been growing at about 3% per year since the 18 and 1900s, with medicine, sanitation, sailing ships, phones, music, the internet. So we are living in a very different world that we evolved from. The way we work, the way we talk, the sunlight that we want to have, how our brains and have grown up, what it means to be focused in the wild, all of that DNA, all of that fundamental human biological underpinning of you was built in a world where it stayed the same. And over the past 100, 200 years, we have had to invent the new ways of thinking about our life, the new ways of approaching philosophy, our new ways of approaching technology. And the question that some of you then will ask is, what does it actually mean? And what it means is that for most of people, if life was always the same, your grandparents was farming and foraging and defending yourself in the forest, your parents were also fighting and defending themselves and farming in the forest, looking for food. And you two were also doing the exact same thing. And interestingly, again, similarly, you would eventually have kids of your own, and they will have the same life as yours. And then those kids will have kids of their own, so you have grandkids, and they would have the same life as yours. So for most of human history, for 1,000,000 years, every generation did the same thing. They were farming, they were hunting, they were on a similar land. Obviously, they'll do migrations, they'll try to survive. But on a per person basis, they're using the same tools, whether it was using seeds or sticks or whatever it was, an axe, or learning how to make axes. They were using the same tools over and over again for 1,000,000 years with very little changes. And people, as a result, had to do similar roles. There was always going to be a farmer. There was always going to be the person who was going to be good at defending your village from other people. There was always going to be people who was good at hunting. But the roles were mostly the same. There was no such thing as occupations or jobs or skills future or upskilling. You learn from your great-grandparents, your grandparents, your parents, and you will teach your kids, your grandkids, and your great-grandkids all the stuff that you need to learn, and you'll all have the same life for generations over and over again. And you and I know this is still true because there are tribes that are in the Amazon, the Sentinelese, they are an island that has never been contacted. They live on a small island in the middle of nowhere. They're protected in South Asia, and they have never seen modern humanity. Sometimes helicopters and planes go over there, but they are living the same life. They're still hunting, they're still fishing. We see satellite images of them living the same life, and they have been living the same life, the life that we used to live hundreds of years ago, 1,000 years ago. And so these people still exist. They are still living the same life. And right now, the decision has been made by the South Asian governments that no one is to bother them, nobody is to contact them, and let them live the life they want to have. And so for them, as long as nobody talks to them, nobody sails up in a boat and tries to give them an iPhone with ChatGPT and an internet connection, they're going to live the same lives over and over again. And this was still a fact for people living in the world today, and that was a fact for most of our ancestors. And in 1626, so we just talk about the 1900s and everything, but 1626, and Sir Francis Bacon, and he wrote this letter in the journal in London. He wrote about a utopia. He wrote this letter that was basically said, if there was a utopia, if there was a heaven, it would look like this in 1626. So that's only about 400 years ago. He said, you will find diverse means yet unknown to you of producing of light originally from diverse bodies. So not reflecting light, not whatever it is, we have the ability to create light. There was something that was magic to them. We will procure means of seeing objects afar, i.e. a telescope or binoculars, as in the heaven and remote places. Let's not even talk about the Hubble telescope or the International Space Station. We will be able to see the remote places and represent things near as far off. So we are able to show things that are far away, we'll be able to show them nearby, and things are far off as near, and making faint distances. We also have the ability to help for the sight, far above spectacles and glasses in use, so we can see much clearly. Today, we can even see DNA and RNA, things that are even smaller than the smallest of things. Mustard seed, a big seed, powder, cell, DNA, RNA. These are things that we're seeing today. We'll be able to see small and minute bodies perfectly and distinctly. And to him, the highest bar possible at that time was the shapes and colors of small flies and worms, grains and flaws in gems. That was the utopia that was 400 years ago. We could see observations in urine and blood, not otherwise be seen. We can make artificial rainbows, halos, and circles about light. He said, if we can make a rainbow, that is a heaven. This was the utopia that they had, the ability to create and control light to be able to observe things. And that was just 400 years ago. And today, what do we have? We have an acceleration of technology that has never been seen before, ever before. Never, ever in the world has 3 generations seen a revolution in the tools and the technology and the lifestyles, let alone the careers and opportunities and the risks. And so all of us are walking around with monkey brains, normal philosophies about what makes us happy, our ability to be happy and sad. But we live in a world where Generation X, my parents' time, the coolest thing to have was to have a Walkman. And you may have seen that in some of your movies. But the idea that you could put a Walkman in this thing, giant pouch, and to listen to a music, a mixtape, and a cassette was the craziest, coolest thing that everybody wanted to have. In my time, we had the Nokia phone. And I remember that before that, there was no phones. And then finally, we could get the Nokia phone that could do calls. And so when I was in primary school, we would have the lineup in front of those pay phones with the coins. And we would put in 10 cents and do that. And we would remember the number of home and we'll hit the numbers to call somebody. And for us, it was a revolution to get a Nokia phone and we could play a game called Snake, where you can have a snake too. And it was not like Clash Royale, where, you know, somebody here was be able to play the music and the effects and everything. For us, playing Snake and collecting those things was incredible for us. And all of us, when we got it, all of us like, ooh, wow, you have a Nokia phone, amazing. Everybody was jealous, and people would beg their parents to be able to have a Nokia phone so they can walk around, and then we could eventually message, text, SMS each other, and so forth. And lastly, we had Gen Z, which is your generation today, born between 1997 to 2012. And now all of you will have your iPhones that they can not only play music, be able to play Snake, SMS, but also be able to watch YouTube videos, talk to ChatGPT on the fly as if it's a human being. That is the technology it has. So think about it. 3 generations, technology has changed from this to this. And back in 1626, Francis Bacon's Utopia was that you could create rainbows. Isn't that crazy? So all I'm just saying is that as of today, around this time age, you are now living in the heaven that he made. And when he wrote that letter, nobody paid attention to it because it was seen as the craziest letter that nobody cared about and nobody gave a shit about it. Now today, we remember it. We look at Wikipedia. It's considered a famous letter because this person predicted the future. But back then, nobody believed him because it was a crazy thing to believe they could do any of those things. Okay? But now I want to ask you this, is if we went from Walkman to Nokia phone, and we went from Nokia phone to ChatGPT, for my daughters who are 3 years and 5 years old, who are Generation Alpha, what will be their technology? Because if you ask me, when I was in Nokia, I read science fiction. I read about AIs or talking about blah, but it's seen as science fiction. So what's the science fiction of today that's going to happen in the next 20 years? And that's something for you to be thinking about. You don't need to think about this, but you have to be very thinking about this because when you are here, you imagine what the jobs are here in order to have a job. And if you did taught well for the Gen X people, they worked at Creative to make MP3 players. They worked at Dell and so forth, and they were working at Nokia, and they got the jobs of their future. Today, nobody wants to work for Nokia, nobody wants to work for BlackBerry. But those were the jobs of the future for this generation. Today, I'm working in the field because I'm working in biotech and AI. I'm working in the field that I can tell you right now that my university did not teach me for, and that my secondary school and junior college did not teach me for. Nobody ever taught me to work in biotech, in AI. So we're living at this time, and you live with it. You think about it as normal. DNA sequencing is normal. ChatGPT is normal. It just came out recently. It's cool. And so you take it as a given. But you want a job, I assume. I assume you don't want to be replaced by AI. So my question I have for you is, what is this job? What is the technology of this next generation? Because that is going to be your job for the next 20 years. Because if you are trying to work at the current jobs that exist today, those jobs are going to disappear. The Walkman job has disappeared. Kodak, which existed for 133 years, is going bankrupt and might be gone in the next year. That's the news that just came out yesterday. Nokia and BlackBerry doesn't exist. Those jobs don't exist anymore. If you are saying to yourself, I want to work in finance, in iPhone, Apple, etc., this job may not exist in 20 years' time. So I think that's something for you to be thoughtful and be thinking about for this. So what are the factors that are driving this change? Why did the world suddenly change where it wasn't accelerating, it was mostly static, and suddenly the world accelerated? There are different components to it. I think one part about it is technology. The class I'm teaching you about technology is a world where we can create more and more value from less and less people. Technology acceleration. Historically, accounting used to be done by paper in our grandparents' time. In our parents' time, they started using learning reluctantly how to use Excel, right? Now, all of us today in accounting and internal audit are using ChatGPT, etc., to help us a little bit of this. So technology helps us become more productive than we have. Trade of resources and ideas. Globally, Singapore was known to be good for electronics. We used to be the China of the world because we used to make the bicycles in 1960, 1970. We used to make the phones and the Walkmans. So we were the Shenzhen of China for the 1960s, 1970s. And some of your parents may even remember that time because they were doing that manufacturing job. They were in those factories making those jobs. But the reason why was because we were making those jobs because we had low-cost labor, we were relatively educated enough and hardworking enough, and we could trade resources and ideas around the world so that we could learn from each other and also be able to be most efficient. Because if the country is very good for making soybeans, let them focus on soybeans. And if we're very good at making bicycles, let us make bicycles, and it will trade for it. Then, of course, there's a state capacity, collaboration, and social contracts, which is a nice way of saying law, violence. A world that's full of violence is a difficult one because if you're very smart and you like to trade, but somebody keeps invading you every 50 years, you have no incentive to farm or build better things. You will spend all your time building walls and training a military to be able to defend your land. And so the ability for states and countries to be able to govern crime, to deliver justice, to enforce social contracts are important because if you and I felt like we'd take whatever we wanted, we would never build anything for the future. We would just take what we want today. Of course, education, literacy, healthcare, and paper, all these are also important. If everybody dies within 30 years, the average age of mortality back in literally the 1800s in Singapore, if you live to 30 plus, etc., was pretty good as well. Obviously, there's infant mortality, there's accidents, backbreaking labor. But the fact that all of us today, our parents are living till 70, 80. For us today, Gen Z, you probably can live to 100 years old, which is a crazy thing to believe. But most of you will be able to do that as long as you take care of your bodies. You don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't do something stupid, you wear your seatbelt. But you can live to 100 years old. And because of that, we can teach each other. I'm 38 years old. So if I die at the age of 30 because of working on a plantation, doing a lumberjack, which is what happened to my grandfather, he died in a plantation being a lumberjack. So I never got to meet him, but I'm older than him. I'm older than my grandfather ever got to be, right, at 38. And now I get to teach you about startups. So if I died at the age of 30, I wouldn't be able to teach you, and you wouldn't be able to get the knowledge because there's a lot of loss of knowledge. So universities are here to teach you and make sure that you learn as fast as possible. Because the truth of the matter is that when you become 38, when you become my age, you'll be smarter than me. I'm smarter than you right now because I have about 14 or 15 years more of life experience compared to you. But I can tell you that when I was your age, after national service, about 22, I didn't have ChatGPT to teach me. Nobody taught me about startups. I didn't understand DNA, RNA. I had to go to the library to learn stuff, or people had to teach me stuff. So the truth of the matter is that you at the age of 24 or 23 or 22 are smarter than when I was 22, 23. And that is the purpose of this university, is that trying to teach you to be smarter, apple to apple. So one day, when you become 38 years old, you think I'm smart, you think I'm experienced, you think whatever it is, but the truth is when you become 38, you'll be smarter than me because you have ChatGPT, you have DeepSeek, you have all these AI models, and they'll train you and answer any question you have, and you'll be able to deliver superior output to me. And at that point of time, I will be 55 years old, and I'll be trying to get used to VR goggles or whatever the newfangled thing is, and whatever it is, but education is a big piece of it, accelerating your learning. And lastly, of course, is corporations and capitalism, the ability to share profit. So instead of saying, I'm going to make this farm and invest in the farm and make the pie bigger, then there was the people who want to take your pie by stealing from you, by robbing you, by invading you, by taking away your pie. But now, with corporations, we now have the ability to split the pie. We can let you invest in building the pie so that you get a share back. You can fractionalize your investments so that more people can share the upside of investing in real estate. But the ability for these corporations, for us to work together in teams that are not just, oh, I will only take care of my family and only my family will take care of me, to only my cousins and my extended family tribe will take care of me and I will take care of my cousins, to I will take care of us because we all work at DBS Bank or UOB, because we all have a dream of being finance bankers. So you all will collaborate, and these banks will come to universities and teach you about the values of being a banker, and you will say, yes, I want to be a banker. Thank you, Mr. Banker, for coming to my class and teaching me about banking. Because again, the corporation is saying, I'm willing to invest in educating you and finding the next generation of investment bankers before they burn out, and so they can support the team as much as possible. So these are all the factors that drive the change. Technology that we talked about, obviously the exchange of resources and ideas, the ability for countries to be able to protect and allow people who want to invest in the future to stay up thinking about the future, the ability for us to educate one another as much as possible and stay healthy for longer. And lastly, of course, for capitalism, for us to be able to share and invest and work together as teams beyond blood or kinship. And so what we see as a result, zooming in out of that, is that over the past 60 years, we have seen that the world continues to grow at about 3% to 4% over this time frame. So this is only over the past 60 years. And this is the amount of GDP that we have. And this is out of a fraction on per capita. On average, each person is growing. And so you can see that this is a zoomed in version over the past 60 years. And again, as we saw for most of human history, for 100,000 to a million years, people are only growing at about 0.05%, which effectively is a flat line. And for us, we're growing at about 3 to 4% year on year. And if we look at Southeast Asia, we actually see a very interesting piece. This brown line that you see here is America that we have here. And what we see here in green is actually Singapore. So the amount of production, the GDP per capita, amount of production, and to some extent, the level of consumption that we have, is America was the primary country and number one country in the world over the past 60 years. But we see that Singapore has done this, you can call it miracle. And again, I'm not trying to promote SG60 or National Birthday, Happy Birthday Singapore, massive fireworks. But I think we have to recognize that there's some credit that Singapore on a GDP per capita has grown up and is comparable to America today. So you live the life that's very similar to American. All of you not only have a laptop, all of you also have a smartphone. All of you have devices at home as well. You're very similar to the lifestyle of American. And as I shared earlier in this class, what's interesting is that Singapore's GDP per capita is now higher than that of the United Kingdom. So the country that used to be our colonial masters, Sir Stamford Raffles, that brought a sleeping fishing village into a thriving free port of commerce in Southeast Asia. And now Singapore has a higher GDP per capita than the UK. The United Kingdom was talking about exiting Brexit. They were saying, we want to emulate Singapore, which is a crazy thing to think about, which is, can you imagine going back hundreds of years and be like, hey, Sir Stamford Raffles, the United Kingdom needs to see Singapore as a role model for the United Kingdom. The guy would have thought you were absolutely insane. And what's interesting to note is that we also have to understand, I think, the luck and the privilege and hard work that Singapore has. Because in the rest of Southeast Asia, these are the other countries that we see here on a GDP per capita basis. So these are, for example, the dark blue is China, the yellow is Malaysia, which we used to be together and used to be also managed by the British at the same time. So you can see the big divergence where our GDP per capita is around $60,000 to $70,000, but Malaysia is closer to about $12,000. And then China and Malaysia are around the same. And obviously, we can see that Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam are order of magnitude smaller than Singapore. And these are our neighbors. Malaysia, like I said, we used to be in a country, same country together for 1965. But again, very different fortunes in terms of the economies that we have. But also, again, these are different countries from the rest of Southeast Asia. And if we look at Southeast Asia as a result, I think what's useful to do is useful to remove those higher components and look at China, Indonesia, India, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, just as a little bit of a way so that we can make it a bit clearer. And Malaysia has grown to about 11 to 12,000 in 2020. And then I think what China has done is all of us thinking about that, the dragon economy. Of course, they are a huge country with 1 billion people, but on a GDP per capita basis, so the average income per person, which describes the average lifestyle, what they have done is they started from a much lower base, you can see that, but they were able to focus on their industrial policy and be able to grow quickly. And currently, the average Chinese person's lifestyle is similar to a Malaysian person's in terms of the GDP per capita at around $12,000. per person. For Thailand, it's similar to Malaysia, and now they're around about $7,000 to $8,000 per capita. Now, of course, what we see here is Indonesia, India, Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia is about 4,000, India is about 3,000, Thailand, Vietnam is around 3,000 as well, and so is India and Philippines as well. So I think I'll show these numbers. Again, I'm not trying to talk about good or bad, but I think we just have to be aware that when we think about the news, we normally think about it as, wow, China is this incredible country of the future. But again, it's not the average person on a per person basis. We're looking at specific areas, specific companies, specific highlights. But the average person right now, their income, same level as me. We talk about India's startup economy, but on a per person basis, there are very rich people, there are very poor people, there are the slums, there are people who are living in houses that built on top of skyscrapers. There's income divide and income equality. But the average basis is that for India is around $3,000 to $4,000 per capita in US dollars. And so I think it's just interesting for us to think about it. And frankly, again, be thankful in some fashion that out of all generations of humanity to be born in, I would rather be born in this generation of humanity. Because King Henry the First, all these guys, they all died from war, they died from gout, they died from diseases, they died from the cold, they died from flu, they died from all these basic stuff. And today in Singapore, you can walk into any clinic and you can get your treatment and you will have better healthcare and live longer than the kings of England 400 or 500 years ago. So this is the best generation to live in compared to all past generations. Even though, yes, it's very depressing to read the news on TikTok or whatever it is, but compared to all humanity over the past million years, this is the best generation to be living in.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.